Even though we massively outnumber the ruling class in this country, why is it so hard to stop them? The number one reason on my list: American people have lost faith in electoral politics. Over the last 7 decades, our average Democratic participation has been pretty meager, and it's getting worse. Let's take the 2008 presidential election. People were pumped. Millions were added to the voter rolls ahead of the election. African Americans and young people turned out like never before. It was inspirational. I remember seeing Oprah on TV the night Barack Obama won, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clung to some random dude in Chicago's Grant Park. No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, that election had to be a high watermark for American democracy, right? Nope. 2008 had the highest voter turnout in 40 years. The U.S. hadn't been that motivated to vote since Richard Nixon ran on his secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. How many people voted in 2008? 132.6 million. Which doesn't sound bad until you hear that 132.6 million is only 61.6% of the nation's eligible voters. In 2008, 213 million Americans were eligible to vote. I realize I'm laying a lot of math on you right now, and I completely understand if your eyes are starting to glaze over, because I'm not really a numbers guy myself. But here is the important number to remember: 32%. In 2008, this historic election with the largest voter turnout our nation had seen in 4 decades, only 32% of eligible voters, about 69.5 million, voted for Barack Obama and actually elected our president. The election of Barack Obama reflected the will of slightly more than 3 out of 10 Americans. The point is not to denigrate Obama's victory or question his legitimacy. He was the clear winner of both the popular vote and the Electoral College. What I like to underscore here is that because more voters didn't participate, 32% of Americans chose the leader of the free world, and 2008 was considered a good year. Let's take another example: Ronald Reagan. The 1984 election is legendary. The Democrats put up Jimmy Carter's VP, Walter Mondale, against St. Ronald, the most popular Republican in living memory. Mondale promised to raise taxes. Incumbent Reagan, at the time the oldest man to ever run for president, joked that he wouldn't hold his opponent's youth and inexperience against him. Everyone laughed and voted for Reagan. He completely dominated. The Gipper took home more than 58% of the popular vote and won 49 out of 50 states in the Electoral College. Boom! Killed it. This election was taken as proof that America loved Reagan's tax cutting and deficit spending. But the voter turnout rate was only about 55%. When you factor in all the non-voters, Reagan only had the support of 32% of the eligible voters. Richard Nixon had a bigger share of the electorate when he lost to Kennedy in 1960. So we just looked at 2 of the biggest presidential elections in the modern era. The election of President Obama had the highest voter turnout in decades. The election of President Reagan was the biggest landslide victory in all American presidential politics. Both were historic, but troubling when one considers how many Americans didn't actually vote. If these are the good examples, what does a bad year look like? Well, we don't have to go too far back to find one. The 2014 midterms had the worst voter turnout since the 1942 election, held during World War II. Only 36% of eligible voters showed up in 2014, a year when the Republicans in the House of Representatives won a dominating majority of 247 to the Democrats' 188. But here's the rub. The Republicans' 40 million votes only amount to a little more than 17% of the electorate. Should 17% of Americans be able to win a 57% majority in the People's House? In the 2014 midterms, 64% of possible voters did not show up, almost 2/3. So the big question becomes why? Why don't Americans vote? The way I see it, there are 3 main reasons that people have stopped voting: disenfranchisement, disaffection, and despair. Disenfranchisement is the intentional suppression of the vote. Both parties are actively taking steps to control who votes and who does not. The goal is to keep those who are perceived as a threat to the established order away from the polls. By disaffection, I mean the rational response to the systemic failures of the 2-party system. Because of the way our electoral system is designed, gerrymandering, the Electoral College, winner-take-all elections, large numbers of Americans are effectively unrepresented. Many citizens recognize that these systemic barriers have rendered their vote meaningless, so they've stopped voting. By despair, I mean total surrender to the cumulative effects of disenfranchisement and disaffection. Some voters have simply given up Candidates don't talk about the things they care about, and neither party represents their interests, so voters become completely alienated. This is the most insidious reason not to vote. Total despair that electoral politics can ever change anything. My message is, don't give up hope. We have the numbers. If it's possible to win a majority in the House of Representatives with just 17% of the electorate, it's possible for us to win. What would ever unite us? Do you earn a paycheck? Do you live off what you make, not what you have inherited? Yeah, there are a lot of us. We're coming for you. Like, follow, and subscribe to my Substack, please. Hey, let's make them pay.